Since 2015, Jared Stillman has rocked Nashville sports.
That team freaking stinks.
And now he's back. The takes are hotter than ever.
I mean, let's be honest, he just can't coach.
Welcome to Stillman and Company.
Stillman and Company on the 440 Sports Network, presented by Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical. That's right. Like and subscribe. Tell your friends. Now, I'm just going to be very, very blunt here at the beginning of today's program. Last week, my voice was all screwed up. You're probably still listening to this now, and you're probably like, man, it kind of sounds like his voice is screwed up. So I woke up this morning, and my voice was still bothering me. My throat was still bothering me. It bothered me all last week. So I said, you know what? I got to go to the doctor. I thought it was the caffeine that I had been drinking a bunch of and the acid reflux, so I had been taking Prilosec. I went to the doctor. If you remember at the beginning of July, I had strep throat. I have strep throat 2.0. So everything in the house has got to get sanitized, everything else, but my voice is just not the same. So it'll probably be that way for a couple of days. So we're going to have today's show. We're not going to have a show tomorrow because I'm going to be on from 8 to 11 a.m. Central Time on Sirius XM on Mad Dog Radio. Then we'll have a show Wednesday recapping the joint practice between the Titans and the 49ers. Then we'll have a show Thursday ahead of the preseason game. And I am planning right now to do a show probably at the beginning of the fourth quarter. Probably at the beginning of the fourth quarter for kind of a post-game live show to the preseason game on Thursday night. And that'll probably be our week. And, of course, TDG gets in here right away, and he has to say the Cam to Tate the Great combo is in full effect, Jared. And that is, of course, going to be the main part of our program today, plus joint practices with the 49ers, plus the WNBA. And I think I figured something out about the WNBA that I'm very, very excited to get to, plus the Dodgers, who, again, this time last week, everybody, all the casual baseball fans were yelling and screaming and saying that we needed a salary cap. And the Dodgers have won one game since then. So we'll get into all of that. First, though, I do want to tell you about our presenting sponsor, Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical. Unlike my throat, Hiller is reliable. So whenever there is something that is wrong in my home, the first people I call, it's Hiller. And they get right out to the home. If there's something we want to change about our home, we go right to Hiller. The project manager comes out and tells us, hey, this is what it's going to cost. This is the work that it's going to take. And oftentimes we go right along with it because nobody's better than Hiller. There have been a couple times where a project manager has come out to my home and has said, I don't think you want to do that. One was for installing an electrical outlet on the back of my chimney. And they were like, you don't want to cut through that. We can do it, but you don't want to do that. The other was about adding a whole home humidifier. And they were like, we can do it, but we'd have to cut through the entire house. And you're just better off getting a humidifier for the rooms in which you and your son sleep in. That is how reliable Hiller is. They have the satisfaction of happy you'll be or the service is free. If a customer is not happy with the work that is performed, Hiller will make it right. And I know this because, again, I use Hiller in my home. That's Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical. Proud supporters of the Preds, the Vols, and Vandy. Hiller, call the Happy Face Truck today. Okay, let's start with the number one topic, and that is Cam Ward. And that is what Cam Ward was able to do over the weekend. Now, full disclosure, I did not go to Friday's scrimmage, but I did watch it on my phone. Shout out to RJ, who had the feed on his phone sitting at about the 50-yard line, and I watched the scrimmage. I was sitting there on the couch. I ended up watching an X-Men movie of all things on Friday night. But I was sitting there on the couch, my son asleep upstairs, and I had my phone out, and I was just watching the scrimmage. And I was watching Will Levis fall on his ass and hearing him laugh. And I was watching Mason Rudolph and watching Cam Ward. And so I saw most of the scrimmage Friday night. Thank you again to RJ. Big fan of the show, big supporter of everything that we try to do, even while we very much disagree on pretty much everything. One person says, I have a drink remedy if you like moonshine. Are you actually a chef? Throw it in the chat. So, I watched the scrimmage on Friday night, and look, I'm not going to go goo goo gaga for how Cam performed on Friday, but he performed in control. And for a second-year quarterback, did I say watching Mason Rudolph? My bad. Mitch Trubisky, Mason Rudolph 2.0. I mean, same fucking guy anyways. I apologize. Cam looked in control on Friday night. Even some of those backyard football plays, which I have said, you cannot coach that. I believe Cam Ward was the number 1 overall pick because the Titans saw those backyard football plays on tape and said, we can coach him everything else. This stuff we can't coach. This is the stuff that we need. And even those little backyard football plays, there was one in particular where Cam started running around, and I was like, oh, this is going to be bad. And then Cam dumps it off to Tajay Spears, and Tajay Spears takes off with the football and runs down the field. And I was very impressed, again, with the control and command that Cam Ward operated with on Friday night. Now, I didn't think Cam did anything that made me just go scream and say, oh, my God. But again, for a second-year quarterback, command and control is a very, very positive development. And the Cam Ward that I saw on Friday night, again, on my phone, thanks to RJ, was not the Cam Ward at OTAs that was throwing the ball 10 feet over a running back's head or shorting a check down. So that is a good sign. And Cam is putting the ball where the ball needs to go, which, again, was a very big concern of mine with Cam Ward's, and one that I felt like hadn't improved going into the OTAs, watching it out there on the field. Now, apparently yesterday, Cam Ward was out there and doing his thing. Now, I didn't go to practice yesterday. I was on Sirius XM for 4 hours yesterday, so I didn't go out to practice. And apparently the story of practice yesterday was really Carnell Tate. We'll get to Carnell Tate in a second. But here's what Jim Wyatt wrote at the team's website as part of his 10 observations from training camp yesterday. Quote, quarterback Cam Ward threw all 3 of the TD tosses to Carnell Tate. Ward excelled in the strike zone, red zone periods, completing 5 of 7 during a stretch when the offense dominated. Things got a little tougher when the offense was backed up, but Ward scrambled for a first down, and he made a throw to Tate when he made the contested catch. I had Ward at 11 of 21 on the day, and I have him at 98 of 156 with 3 interceptions through the first 8 practices of camp. So forget about the stats. I don't care about the composite stats of training camp on how Ward's doing, but I do care about how Ward performed yesterday. And I think it's a highlight that Ward performed well in the red zone, because it was just a week ago that I was sitting there behind the end zone watching Cam Ward, seeing Carnell Tate run open in the middle of the end zone, and feeling like Cam couldn't see him. Cam threw the ball away. Tate was open twice, and Cam threw it away. And I'm like, what's he doing here? And my theory was that Cam, at 6'1", can't see over the big defensive lineman at 6'4", 6'5", so he can't see Tate over the middle to get him the ball for a touchdown. Now, in these, I don't know exactly where the touchdowns were. I saw the one highlight where Tate went up, magnetized the football with his hands, came down and got those feet in there, which was incredible. But, again, I do think that this sounds like an improvement based upon what I had seen again in OTAs and the early part of training camp. Now, I'm not going to go all goo goo gaga again over 2 practices specifically that I didn't see. But there is one thing, and this may be a confirmation bias take, as in I thought about this as a possible solution, and so now I think I may be projecting my feelings onto this solution. And that is, during OTAs, when Cam could not hit the broadside of a barn, I thought to myself, how much of this is Brian Daboll? Because remember, Cam was doing all these interviews, and Cam was talking about how, Brian Daboll lets us do what we want to do. How much of that was Brian Daboll saying, okay, Cam, You tell me what you want to do. Now, it's OTAs, and the stakes are very low, but you tell me what you want to do. Okay, that's what you want to do. Let's call it. And then Brian Dable analyzing Cam doing what he tells the coach he's comfortable doing. Dable can sit there and say, check, that works. That doesn't. And then he can start calling it in practices. Now he's got a week and a half of practices under his belt. Now is Brian Dable going back to the drawing board and taking things off of Cam's plate, saying, well, I'd like to call this, but he can't see this right. Or I'd like to call this, but it's not natural for him, so I'm going to call this instead. Again, I don't know that. Nobody's asked Brian Dable that. Brian Dable certainly has not volunteered that information, but I do wonder that. I wonder, and I thought about this with Callahan when Will Levis was stinking it up in 2024 in OTAs. And I said at the time, maybe Callahan is just learning what Will Levis can and cannot do. And then once they get into game-like situations, once Callahan gets a knowledge base for what Levis can and cannot do, that will change what he calls. And it wasn't really until mid-August and the Seahawk joint practices in 2024 when I started to think Levis and Callahan don't have it. Both of them. And it was really the Chicago game where right before Levis flicked that ball to the Bears to cost him the game, I said to my dad when I saw, how Fox will put the statistics down at the lower part of the screen, and I turned to my dad and I said, I think this guy is a backup. I don't think he's a starting quarterback because I don't think Dan Marino would throw for 70 yards in 3 quarters of the first game of his second year. And that's what we were hoping for, was that Levis was going to become like a Dan Marino type quarterback. And so I gave Callahan the benefit of the doubt when things weren't right in OTAs. I didn't just immediately give Dable the same benefit of the doubt that I gave Callahan simply because I felt fooled for having given Callahan that benefit of the doubt. But Brian Dable is a solid offensive coordinator and has been a solid offensive coordinator in the NFL before. So maybe that is why Cam has taken his game up a level. That being said, I think the joint practices tomorrow, can Cam keep it going? That I don't know. The preseason game on Thursday, I assume the joint practice will be harder on Cam than the preseason game because the preseason game, the 49ers aren't going to play anybody. The 49ers are already without half their team. I think they've got like 20% of their team is injured. And they get so injured as a team, they're not going to play anybody in the preseason. So there's not going to be a Fred Warner out there in the game on Thursday. There's not going to be a Nick Bosa out there in the game on Thursday. But there will be those guys in practice. So I expect that the joint practice will be tougher, but at the same time, Cam can't get hit. And if you can't get hit, then as a quarterback, you can stand back there and manage it a little differently. But I think tomorrow's a big day for Cam. But if you thought I was going to come on here and you thought I was going to poo-poo the performance that Cam had over the weekend, I'm not going to do that. I mean, again, what I saw watching on Twitter on Friday night was a Cam Ward that was in control. And even when Cam played what we would consider to be out of control or off script, he was still in control. It wasn't him running around and no idea where he was going to go, and then he throws the ball and it gets intercepted because he just threw it out there in the field and some guy. No. It was in control. And so, for me, it's a very positive development. And it sounds like a very positive 2 days as far as Cam Ward is concerned. Once again, I can only go off of what Jim Wyatt wrote because I didn't go to practice yesterday. But he said, hey, in the red zone, which I thought was going to be something that I was very concerned about, he said Cam Ward was throwing the ball to Carnell Tate and that they were scoring touchdowns. And that is a step in the right direction. So that's the first one. The second one is Carnell Tate. 3 touchdowns yesterday in the red zone, and Jim Wyatt even wrote that he was more impressed by a catch that Tate made when the offense was backed up in order to get a first down. That also includes, or what we should include over the weekend, the one-handed catch that Carnell Tate made in the scrimmage on Friday. Let me say this about Carnell Tate. I was against the selection of Carnell Tate, and I do not hide from that. I sat there in the massage chair that Lindsay was kind enough to let me buy and place into our guest bedroom so that nobody, unless they're staying in the guest bedroom, sees it. And it was a Saturday in March, and I was sitting in the massage chair, and I turned on the combine, and I watched Carnell Tate run a 4.52. And I watched Daniel Jeremiah make every excuse in the book for Carnell Tate running a 4.52, and then he got up there, and he ran a 4.53. And for me, I was out. Again, you can say whatever you want about 40 times in the combine, but that's what the old man taught me. And I was out. So when the Titans turned in the pick with Arvell Reese on the board, with Sonny Styles on the board, with Caleb Downs on the board, and they turned in the pick for Carnell Tate, who again ran a 4.52 and a 4.53 at the combine, I thought to myself, oh my God, here we go again. They drafted a receiver because they needed to draft a receiver. The same reason they overdrafted Corey Davis in 2017. They drafted a receiver because they needed to draft a receiver. And then I talked to somebody in the league that night, an executive, and I said, is Carnell Tate, did the Titans make a good pick? And that executive texted back, said, yeah, he's a good player. I said, okay. Then I talked to somebody with the Titans on the Saturday night of the draft. And they told me, they said, look, we wanted Jeremiah Love. And we thought we were going to get Jeremiah Love. But once we found out during the week that Jeremiah Love was going to be the pick to Arizona at 3, it was a very cut and dry decision for us. And that was Carnell Tate. He said the Titans told me there was nobody in the same cluster of player caliber that they had left other than Carnell Tate, which makes me think that that first cluster of players was probably Love, Bailey, and Tate. So they take Carnell Tate. And I go out to the field, and I'm watching Carnell Tate at OTAs. And this is why I always laugh whenever people say things like, Jared Stillman never admits he's wrong. Jared Stillman, I'm out there at OTAs. I booed the Carnell Tate pick. Same way I booed the Chris Johnson pick as a high school senior in the middle of a baseball doubleheader. I went out there to OTAs, and I watched Carnell Tate. And I'm like, this guy's pretty good. And I kept saying it, did I not? I kept saying I turned to Easton Freeze after Tate would make a great catch. I'm like, well, this guy's pretty good. And somebody with the Titans said, well, what do you think of Tate? I'm like, he's pretty good. By the end of minicamp, I had gone up to Burke Nihill, the team CEO, and I said, let me tell you something. You guys did not miss on this pick. During OTAs, did I not tell you people? Did I not put out a video on Twitter? Did I not? In which I said, I'm just watching Carnell Tate, and this guy catches the ball like a first baseman. This guy's got magnet hands out there. So when Carnell Tate puts on the show that he put on Friday with the one-handed catch, and when Carnell Tate goes out there on Sunday and has 3 touchdowns in the red zone period, that does not surprise me because I saw that from Carnell Tate during OTAs. Jim Wyatt wrote about it at the team's website that, boy, Jared Stillman, he is singing a different tune about Carnell Tate. And this is what I always talk about with the pro day workouts and things like that. This is why it's so important. I can go out and watch a guy in the practice field, and I can say, like, I don't see it. And then I can see that same guy on the practice field some days, and I can be like, I think this guy's got something. And there have been guys that I've looked at, and I've thought, you know what? I think this guy's got something. and they end up not being worth a shit. Doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And there are some guys where I just don't see it. And then they go out there, and maybe they produce a little bit. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if there's a guy, I know you guys are going to say Cam, but I mean, if there's a guy, more recently where I was like, and then that guy became pretty good. Again, just watching him on the practice field. I mean, I remember going out to a COVID practice where you had to have a mask over your face at practice. And I remember watching Khalif Raymond. And I remember saying that day on the Jared and the GM program, like, hey, I'll tell you, this Khalif Raymond, he looks pretty good. And Floyd laughed at me. Ian can back you up on this one. Floyd laughed at me. He's like, ha, 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 ha. He's caught 20 balls in the NFL. I'm like, I don't know, Khalif Raymond. He looks like he's doing his thing out there. Not that I ever thought Khalif Raymond was like Carnell Tate. But I'm like, he looks out there like he's doing his thing. And the old man laughed at me. And here we are in 2026. And Carnell Tate or Khalif Raymond's just still in the NFL, just still doing his thing. There are guys, again, I see on the practice field that I'm like, I see it. And I saw it right away on Carnell Tate. And I almost wonder if I'd gone to a pro day workout, watched Carnell Tate, would I have walked away saying the same thing? About, again, the guy catches the ball like a first baseman. Just standing there with the mitt, and, you put it in the dirt, just sucks it right up. And so when everybody was hyping up what Carnell Tate was doing on the practice field, I don't want to say I shrug it off, or I don't think it's a big deal or anything like that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I'm not surprised, because I walked away from the second OTA practice convinced that, hey, Carnell Tate, this dude's got the goods. And now, can the quarterback get him the ball consistently? And here's also what's going to happen. There was one touchdown Cam threw last week to Tate. It was a very good throw. Tate got behind Alontae Taylor, and Cam kind of put it out there in the end zone, and Tate just glides under it. Tate, I mean, he glides like a ballerina, and he glides to the ball, and he catches it. And I said to Braden Gall, I go, that's great. But the second that happens in a game, the next time Carnell Tate's out there, there's going to be somebody over top. And so I think what the NFL will do is they will let Tate go off once. And then once Tate goes off, now he's going to be bracketed. Now he's going to be double teamed. Now they're going to have guys follow him on the field. Then how will he perform? And I actually feel pretty good about Carnell Tate's ability to manage that, because, again, his skills are not just running by guys. It's running his routes precisely. He had a comeback route about a week ago where when he came back on the curl, the DB was dusted. It's about catching the ball. I mean, the way that his hands can just suck in the football and he can win a contested catch. There was the one-handed catch that he had in OTAs that I said, oh, my God. And then he had a contested. I'm like, and I don't care that that's some Scarbini corner. So I am in on Carnell Tate and have been in on Carnell Tate since OTAs. Now it's going to get more difficult for him once teams realize how good he is. But I'd rather have it get more difficult than for us to be sitting here saying, oh, my God, here we are, it's 6 weeks in, and I don't know, I just don't see it. That is not how I feel about Carnell Tate. And I can't remember the last time I was this excited about a Titans first-round draft pick. I certainly was. I mean, I didn't think Isaiah Wilson was a bad pick, because on tape, Isaiah Wilson at Georgia was an absolute beast with great feet for a right tackle. I mean, Isaiah Wilson at Georgia, he played in all the games. He played against the best competition in the SEC. He was a beast at right tackle. Now, he might have been cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, but as far as what the tape said, I mean, Isaiah Wilson wasn't bad. Wasn't excited about Farley. Burks had his moments in training camp, but he got off to such a bad start with the asthma, which, by the way, apparently he's never had in the NFL since then. The asthma and all the shit, And he was replacing A.J. Brown, so it was a little bit more difficult. Not sure I was totally all that excited about Burks. Skoronski's a guard. Who was their first-round pick in 24? Oh, J.C. Latham. By the way, I was doing the show with Braden today, and we were doing kind of an abbreviated show. And I wanted to say, as I was commending Carnell Tate, and I was talking about how Cam looked in control on Friday night, which was a good thing, and I was saying a bunch of positives about the Titans. I do just want to say this. Boy, TDG is going to lose his shit about what I'm about to say. Just call this a feeling. God, I'm almost shaming myself out of saying this. Call this a feeling. Call me a Nick Sabanist if you want. I think J.C. Latham sucks. Not that I don't think he's the best right tackle on the team. I think he's the best right tackle on the team. And not that I think he's Evan Neal, who was a big old fatty right tackle that went in the top 10 out of Alabama and was not worth a shit in the NFL. They've tried to move him to guard. That hasn't worked. He just can't play. I mean, just go ask your line coach, because he was Evan Neal's line coach. I don't think J.C. Latham is as bad as Evan Neal. But there's just something about J.C. Latham. I can't put my finger on it, but I just don't like it. And I think I said this when Latham was picked. And I said, a lot of people love the big size. And they say, look at him, 360. And I'm like, I don't like that. I don't like these big fat linemen that Saban produces from Alabama, because Saban produces all these big fat linemen, and that's great when you're playing in the SEC. And even the best SEC teams probably have one or two NFL starters on them that are not fully developed. Again, go back through who Alabama plays over the years. Yes, there will be a game against an SEC team like a Georgia or a Texas or somebody that's got two defensive linemen that will start in the NFL. But that's not every week. Now, most of them do have one guy that will start in the NFL. And so Saban would get these guys so big and fat, and they would run the ball, and they would just, slide to wherever the one good guy was that they were playing against. And then they get in the NFL, and the being big and fat doesn't necessarily work as well, because all these other guys are all NFL caliber defensive linemen. Again, you're not going to play in an NFL game Jeffrey Simmons and Jermaine Johnson and Keldrick Falk and John Franklin Myers. And that is what you're playing in an NFL game. I know that Mississippi State had Montez Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons at the same time, and they were unstoppable. So I've always felt like the big, fat Saban offensive linemen are not as good in the NFL, because I feel like the NFL offensive lines require less girth and more agility. And I don't necessarily think that's Latham's game. Now, them moving Latham over to left tackle was a disaster before it even started, and I can't believe Bill Callahan tried that shit. But, again, just looking at Latham for what he is at right tackle, I am not a fan. I don't think J.C. Latham's very good. Now, one person, Nevada Josh says into the chat he's better than PT, and that's right. So it's so much for be careful what you wish for, Jared, because absolutely. I think J.C. Latham is a starting caliber tackle in the NFL, which I would never say for PT. And, again, I use the comparison to Evan Neal. Evan Neal was not a starting caliber tackle in the NFL. I think what turned me off to the big fat Saban offensive lineman was Chance Warmack. You guys remember Chance Warmack? The Titans drafted him, I think, with the 10th overall pick. A fucking guard who sucked. At least Peter's kind of doing his own thing out there, even though he's never made a Pro Bowl. But they drafted Chance Warmack. And again, this was Mike Munchak who was the coach when they drafted him. And they drafted Chance Warmack, and Chance Warmack wasn't shit. And every time they would show a replay of somebody screwing something up, it was 9 times out of 10 Chance Warmack's fucking fault. And Chance Warmack was so big, and his feet were so large, and he was so shitty. He just didn't have the heart. And so Warmack goes in as the starting guard that last year that he's in the NFL, or at least with the Titans. He goes in as the starting guard, and he gets hurt like in the first or second week of the year. And they claim Josh Klein off of waivers from New England, and they stick Josh Klein out there, and Josh Klein off of waivers way better than Chance Warmack. And I think that, for me, was when I officially kind of got turned off to the big, fat Nick Saban offensive lineman in the NFL. And J.C. Latham, with all due respect, is absolutely a big, fat Nick Saban offensive lineman. So I was just never a fan of the pick. I felt better about it last year when they moved him back to right tackle. I just don't see it. I look at the offensive line, and I know that we all have concerns with Schlottman and Volson. I throw Latham in there too. That, again, I do think that Latham's going to be better than Evan Neal. Quickly, I want to hit on the practices tomorrow. So when it comes to the joint practice, Titans-49ers, the number one thing that everybody's going to want to talk about is that electromagnetic substation that's right next to the practice facility and the fact that all these 49er players get hurt. Now, I am not a conspiracy theory guy, though I think a lot of people like to think that I am a conspiracy theory guy. I am not. I think the electromagnetic substation, I think that's bullshit. But there are 20 players that are hurt on the 49ers right now. And I know Robert Saleh laughed it off after practice on Friday and said, oh, that's all overblown. But wasn't it George Kittle that said Saleh's a big conspiracy theorist? I mean, he thinks the seed oils fucking matter. So if he thinks the seed oils matter, I can't imagine that he's going to think the substation doesn't matter, even if he does just blow it off. So that's the first thing, is I don't believe in this substation thing, but shit, it's definitely in the back of my mind. Knock on wood. You always hope the number one thing that comes out of these practices, no injuries, but knowing that there's that subfield. And look, the 49ers say that they paid somebody a bunch of money to run a study and there's no comparison. They already knew that. The 49ers paid somebody so that they could say to the players, instead of just saying, that's bullshit, they paid money to somebody so that they can say, we care about this so much, we did our research, and that's bullshit. But the truth is, they knew it was bullshit. And I think it's bullshit too, but it makes me a little nervous that it might not be bullshit. Now you're sending your players out there. The second thing is this. We talk about Cam on Friday night. We talk about Tate on Friday night. We talk about Cam on Sunday. We talk about Tate on Sunday. What we have not talked about, and I think this is a really good thing, we've not talked about the offensive line. Now, I know the Titans are going to have a good defensive line this year because there's too many good players on it, and there's too many rotation caliber NFL players on that defensive line. Like, take a guy like Solomon Thomas. Yes, he was overdrafted in 2017. But if you told me about Solomon Thomas and you say this guy is going to give 100% effort for 13 plays in a game, I think those are going to be 13 positive plays. And so they've got Jacob Martin, and they've got Femi Oladejo, and they've got Keldrick Falk, and they've got all these guys they can rotate in and out. So I know the Titans' defensive line's going to be good this year. Robert Saleh's coaching them. We haven't heard anybody complain about the practice on Friday, about the offensive line, complain about Sunday, the offensive line. And again, I've told the story in 2023 where I walked out third day, they hadn't even worn pads. And I called my dad and I said, this offensive line is absolute dog shit. And I haven't done that after any of these practices that I've been to. I have not walked out and said, oh my God, this line, they're terrible. Now, there's one guy on the line who I think kind of sucks, Austin Deculus, who I hope never has to play. But I have not said, even as I was just trashing J.C. Latham, I do not think that this line is a bad line. I think that's a pretty big deal. Now, you're going up against San Francisco, and they've got Nick Bosa tomorrow in practice. Now, I don't know if he's hurt. Again, if they've got 20 whatever, players hurt, maybe he's one of them. I mean, Nick Bosa is hurt all the freaking time. But I want to see how the O-line holds up against the best of the best with the 49ers tomorrow, which you're not necessarily going to see in the preseason game on Thursday. And finally, kicker. You better get that figured out. Because if with Robert Saleh as your coach, you're probably going to have a good defense. So I think the Titans are going to have a top 16 defense in the NFL. The Saleh impact, plus they are better in the secondary, and I do think Franklin Myers makes a big difference on that defensive line. So they are going to, I think, be a top half of the NFL defense. They're not going to be a top 10 defense. They're not going to be a top 5 defense. That's okay. But they're going to have a good defense, or a good enough defense. I know we all want to get excited about Cam and Carnell Tate and think they're going to score 40 points a game. This team is not designed to score 40 points a game. So when you play and you try to win some of these games, they're going to come down to one possession, and they're going to come down to field goals. And this Joey Sly, he wasn't all that good last year. He is not kicking the ball well in camp and in the scrimmages. That's why they worked out a shitload of kickers on Saturday. This might be the last chance for Joey Sly. Because he's out there in San Francisco, so he's going to be doing the kicking tomorrow, and he's going to be doing the kicking on Thursday night. This might be his last chance. Now, I haven't looked up his contract to be able to tell you Joey Sly, when it comes to, the guaranteed money that they would owe him to get rid of him. I never thought Joey Sly was that good last year. I wouldn't have brought him back after last year. That's just me. But you cannot have this guy out there missing kicks. Not in a league where you can go find guys in the UFL and bring them in and have them kick and be just fine. So that's what I'm looking at in these joint practices with the 49ers. And I would like to know, and I guess I'll ask Nick Suss about this later in the week, but I'd like to know how my boy, Mac Jones, ends up looking out there, because, I think Mac Jones is pretty good. That's the Titans and the San Francisco practices. Again, we'll recap the practices on Wednesday. I'm going to try to get Suss or PK on the show on Wednesday to kind of recap the practices. And then, of course, we'll have the game on Thursday. Now, I want to talk about the WNBA for a second. So who's been following the latest drama inside the WNBA and the latest drama outside the WNBA? Because I did have an epiphany this weekend. So I saw what Dejanay Carrington did when she went up and cheap-shotted Sophie Cunningham for what was an obvious flagrant 2, and she got kicked out of the game. The broadcasters watched it and said, that's a flagrant 2. The referees reviewed it. They got up there. They said it was a flagrant 2. It was obvious. And then Dejanay Carrington, the second she gets to the locker room, pulls out her phone and goes on Threads, because I guess she's too good for Twitter. And she puts out there white privilege in regards to Sophie Cunningham. And I thought, oh my God, here we freaking go, WNBA. They can't stop it. And that is on top of all the transgender talk that has now been bombarding the WNBA. Enes Kanter, who, by the way, I think is such a fucking loser. And I think Enes Kanter is all doing this for attention, and congratulations to him, it's working. But he put out a video the other day where he declared for the WNBA draft because he says he identifies now, I guess, as transgender, which is his business, but whatever. And I thought to myself, on one hand, there's all this negative drama surrounding the WNBA. There's all this social, political debate, media coverage, anger surrounding the WNBA. And yet, I actually watched the WNBA games on television yesterday. Did you see all the people in the stands? ABC had a game at 11 a.m. NBC had a game in the middle of the day. ESPN had a game on at night. And the crowds in all of them had tons of people in them. And I looked it up yesterday. The average attendance for the WNBA is over 11,000 per game. Pre-pandemic, 2019, it was 6,500. And it made me realize something. It made me realize that all of the negativity, all of the drama, all of the political media talking points, that's all outside the game. That's all outside noise for the WNBA. But the TV ratings are up. The games are getting more exposure than they've ever gotten. And the crowds are packed. And I can tell you, somebody that chooses to sit in the 300 level for a WNBA game is not going because they heard them complaining about the WNBA on Fox News. Which means there are two separate stories here. There is the growth and popularity of today's WNBA, which is real, it is tangible. The reality is, and I'm one to bang on the commissioner too, and she's got to go. But everything that happens with the WNBA, we are in uncharted territory because we've never had a professional women's league in America that has been as popular as the WNBA is right now. That's what's going on in the game. Again, national television windows, packed crowds, people that are paying money and investing time to watch the WNBA. You want to know the reason that Fox News hasn't dedicated all these segments to the WNBA until now? Because nobody cared enough about the WNBA for them to be able to do that. So that's all positive. The negative is the league taking care of Caitlin Clark? And why is Caitlin Clark so popular? But at the same time, Caitlin Clark is so hated inside that league, and all of the talking points that come out. And now it's gotten into the transgender talk. First, it was a transgender swimmer. Then it was a transgender boxer. And now it's some made-up transgender basketball player that hasn't even truly tried to play in the WNBA. Again, we're having all these talks about should the WNBA let a transgender woman play in the WNBA. But there isn't an actual transgender woman, at least that I'm aware of, that is actually trying to play in the WNBA. Enes Kanter has no real interest in playing in the WNBA. Enes Kanter has interest in people paying attention to Enes Kanter. Those aren't the same thing. And by the way, I'll just say this. As far as the grandstanding of the wanting to, hey, I used to play in the NBA and I now identifying as a woman, put me in. If Enes Kanter cuts off his pee-pee, then we have to have a discussion. If he is that committed to the bit that he's willing to cut his penis off and have the transitional surgery to truly be a transgendered woman, then we can have that discussion. As long as Enes Kanter has his pee-pee, I'm not interested in this, what I think is a publicity stunt. But again, that drama is outside the game. That's outside noise. And the people that are sitting in the 300 levels at the WNBA games, they are not upset about transgender athletes when they decide to spend money to go to a WNBA game to cheer on their team. And I think that's great. I think it's great for the WNBA. So, as easy as it is to crap on the WNBA, I think we need to keep in mind that for 28 years, the WNBA was around. I'm not sure that the political cable news channels ever talked about the WNBA because I'm not sure anybody ever cared about the WNBA. Now, they can't get enough of it. Jesse Waters is on television saying, I don't want to talk about the WNBA. Now they have real crowds and national TV windows, and they're not playing their games on Lifetime. Lindsay and I had friends stay with us a couple weeks ago. They're having their floors redone. Married couple, they're expecting their first. And the husband is from Iowa. And there was an Indiana Fever game that was on. And we put on the Indiana Fever game, and he watches the games. He's talking about the rotations and the decisions the coach is making. And he didn't give a shit about transgender athletes pretending to try to play in the WNBA. But here's the problem. All that attention on the outside that has really nothing to do with what's going on at the games, in the arenas, with the fans, has now kind of boiled over. First, there was Sophie Cunningham, who came out and went right to the jugular, right to the Riley Gaines. We don't want any little girls to have to play with little boys. An unforced error. But Sophie Cunningham was going for attention. And then she got it. Then I think her teammates got mad at her because now we're being asked about it, and that's why she came out and said, I want to get back to basketball last week. Then there's what Dejanay Carrington did the other night. And I'm sorry, but that was premeditated. She saw the opportunity to take out Sophie Cunningham and earn some points, and she did it. And I know that she went right to the locker room and said, I'm going to put out white privilege right away so that everybody's going to see my post and people are going to know who I am. Because I don't know about you, but before this weekend, I didn't even know who Dejanay Carrington was. I talked to people that know Dejanay Carrington from the WNBA, college basketball. She went to Stanford. She graduated from Stanford. She was a smart kid. She knew what she was doing. The league is getting more popular. People like Sophie Cunningham, who if she didn't defend Caitlin Clark last year, nobody would even know who she is. They're using that to their personal advantage. Dejanay Carrington's doing the same thing. The WNBA is not about white privilege. And if I was the commissioner of that league, I'd suspend her for even dragging us with everything good going on in the game. I would suspend her for even trying to drag us into that. And then finally, I want to hit on the Dodgers, if I may, for a second. So this time last week, everybody was getting over the reality that the Dodgers were acquiring Tariq Skubal. So Tariq Skubal gets traded to the Dodgers. The Tigers didn't want to re-sign him, or they couldn't re-sign him. It was going to be too much money. The Dodgers ended up making a trade, and everyone, it's unfair. The Dodgers, they're automatically going to win the World Series, and we need a cap, and all of that. And I kept saying, we don't need a cap. Milwaukee could have traded for Skubal. The Rays could have traded for Skubal. They decided not to. The Dodgers go for it. They decide to make the trade. The Dodgers have lost 8 of their last 9. And the one they did win on Saturday, they had to win in extra innings. If the playoffs started today, the Milwaukee Brewers are the number 1 team in the National League. And the Milwaukee Brewers have a current payroll of $142 million. The Mets, by the way, are dead last in the National League East. They have a payroll of $359 million. What drives me bananas about the baseball discourse is I feel like a lot of the people that think that we need a salary cap in baseball are really the people who, how do I say this? They're casual fans. And they're just tired of the Dodgers winning every year. But the Dodgers won last year against the Toronto Blue Jays for a myriad of reasons, not just because they have a high payroll. They didn't dominate Toronto. That series could have gone either way. And if they were to play the Brewers in the NLCS or even in the division series, that is if they make it out of the wild card round, that series could go 6 or 7 games and could be decided by one pitch here, one play there, one big base hit here. And when you've got Shohei Ohtani and Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman, it's probably more likely that those are going to go your way. But again, they've had those guys for the last 9 games, and they've lost 8 of them. The reason owners in baseball, specifically Colorado, Miami, teams like that, are begging for a salary cap is because they lost their regional sports network television contracts, and they were making a ton of money off of a bunch of people who never watched their games. And in 2019, Sling TV and Dish got rid of the RSNs. It was an experiment to see how many people would change their cable provider just to watch these games, and the answer was not many. And with that followed YouTube TV, and then Hulu, and then the cable providers. And then remember, Xfinity said, we'll take your regional sports network, but you've got to put it up on another paid platform. It's got to be on another tier. And ever since then, we've seen half of them shut down. And so teams are having to launch their own networks, or Major League Baseball's having to do it. Those things were cash cows. Now, the Dodgers still have their TV deal. They still make over $300 million a year from it. Teams like the Yankees are always going to have a local TV deal because there's always going to be enough people that care about those teams to watch in the regular season. The Colorado Rockies, not so much. And that's why the owner of the Rockies, Dick Monfort, is desperate for us to have a salary cap. You want to know what led to the last strike in 94? CBS was paying $256 million a year to air baseball. After 4 years of doing it, they said we're losing so much money that the only way we'll be interested at all in paying for baseball again is to go from paying $265 million a year to $120 million a year. That's what led to the strike of 94. CBS pulled out of their agreement in 93. If we do have a strike, it's not going to be about the imbalance of we can't compete with the Dodgers because the Diamondbacks, who don't have a TV deal, just took 2 out of 3 from them. It will be because the owners of the Rockies and the Marlins and the Reds and the Guardians and all the mid-level teams that for years had made hand-over-fist cash off of airing their games on Fox Sports Ohio or Fox Sports Florida or Fox Sports Rocky Mountain now aren't making as much money. And I don't think anybody wants to have a strike because of that, right? And I think they know that too. Okay, let's hit some of your reaction today on the program. Boy, I tell you, a lot of people want to get all into this Cam Ward and Carnell Tate stuff, and I'm here for that. Let's see. Fast Car says, Jared, let's play the optimism hypothetical and assume Cam will significantly improve this year. Do you think the offensive line will be good enough to actually protect him decently this year for it to even matter? Let me answer this question by telling you, I have not been down on the offensive line so far through camp. Now, we'll see when they go up against the 49ers tomorrow and we hear what the reports are there, because I'm not going to be there. I'll be on Sirius XM tomorrow from 8 to 11. But we'll see. And then we'll see in the game on Thursday. But right now, I actually feel okay about the Titans' offensive line. I don't feel great about the Titans' offensive line, but I feel okay. One person says the reaction to the Tate pick on your stream was priceless. I mean, look, I wasn't expecting to lose my shit on draft night when they took Carnell Tate. Braden asked me before the draft, because we started at 6 o'clock and then the draft went on at 7. And Braden said to me, is there a single player out there that if they take, you'll lose it tonight? Because at that point we were talking about Reese and Bailey and Love and Styles and maybe a little Caleb Downs. And I said, well, if they take Tate, that's the one where I think I'd lose it. And then they took Tate, and I lost it. And I will say it took me 2 OTA practices to say, okay, this guy, okay. This, I can see it. Forrest says, feeling really good about Tate. Not saying he will come out like A.J. Brown or anything, but could definitely see him being a solid number one for years to come. I think Carnell Tate's going to have a really big game really early in the season. And then I think teams are going to start paying more attention to him. But I think Carnell Tate is going to have a game early in the year. He's just too good. I think he's going to have a game early in the year where we're like, whoa, look at that dude play. And I don't know what the specifics were of the trade. I am surprised Kansas City didn't go all in to try to move up to get Carnell Tate, knowing what I know now about his game and their receiving core. Oof. Unless you want to bet on Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy. One person says the injury report is 4 for the Titans and 10 plus on the Niners side. I remember a couple years ago we were supposed to have 2 joint practices with Arizona, and they were so injured that they only had 1. I'm like, I could see the 49ers tomorrow saying, like, hey, let's have more of a walkthrough type practice than a true joint practice just because there are so many guys that are hurt. Belvis says, granted, it was on RJ's feed, but it was stated that there were a lot of blatant holding calls that were not called. Take that for what you will. So a couple things here. Number one, I did hear RJ's play-by-play. I honestly thought it was better than Taylor Zarzour. He wasn't trying to call it, but he and his boys were just sitting there and they were watching the scrimmage and just reacting, and I was laughing my ass off. Number two, while it's easy to look at a play and to say that would be called as holding in a game, that does not mean that these shitty refs that the NFL has are going to call holding in the game. I'll give you the one that I still can't get over to this day. Do you remember in Will Levis's first start against the Falcons? He threw a bomb down the sideline to DeAndre Hopkins. I think it was the first of the 3 touchdown passes Levis had that day, and the third was the one, or maybe it was 4, but the one to NWI was the one that kind of capped it like, oh my God, this guy might actually be good. But I think it was the first one. He threw a bomb down the field to DeAndre Hopkins. That happened right in front of where I was sitting. And DeAndre Hopkins took the corner, grabbed him by the shoulder pads, and just threw him off. And I'm like, okay, this is going to come back because it's clearly pass interference, and they didn't call it. So when you tell me that there were a lot of holding penalties out there that wouldn't get called, I'm going to say we don't know that. Like, we don't know in a game if that would get called or if that wouldn't get called. One person said, Buck said, the Titans have a chance to be the worst offensive line since he started covering the team. There is no chance this offensive line is going to be as bad as the offensive line 2 years ago or the 2023 offensive line under Vrabel and Hodeling. No chance. This is going to be better than that. They have 2 starting NFL tackles, and that's something you couldn't say in 2023 and 2024, and I give them grace in 2022 for the left tackle, which was Dennis Daly that everybody was crapping on, because they thought they were going to have Taylor Lewan there, and Lewan tore his ACL week 2. So they were playing with a backup there. I don't give them any credit at right tackle because they let David Quessenberry walk, who had basically been starting at tackle for 2 years for this team because they thought they could do better and ended up being PT, which was a disaster. I think that this will be the best Titans offensive line since 2021, and I would think that last year's offensive line was the best Titans offensive line since 2021 because it was so bad in 22, 23, and 24. This line, I've seen enough. It's not going to be that bad. I think Buck was just saying shit to say shit. Nevada Josh says, when's the wedding? Remember that if you do it during the NFL season, that will make her feel extra special. No. Our wedding is going to be in the spring. So get excited about that. I might have to make TDG work to get an invite. Since he stood me up at Twin Peaks the one time he said he was coming on draft night and never showed. All right, that's going to do it for us. Like and subscribe. I'm going to go rest my voice. No pod tomorrow. I will be on Sirius XM Mad Dog Radio from 8 to 11 a.m. tomorrow, Central Time, so be looking for that. We'll be back Wednesday at Stillman & Company on the 440 Sports Network.